Inside is amazing, and horrifying all in one. But what makes it so horrifying? What makes it so enthralling? Why does this minimalistic side-scrolling platformer have such an impact on you from the start? Well, it's because the game doesn't tell its own story really. You do. It gives you exactly what you need to start constructing myriad narrative threads, all leading down to terrifying and exciting stories. Inside is full to the brim with moments of powerful anxiety, tenseness that makes you hold your breath, and most importantly, cases of meticulous design that allow your brain to run wild with possibilities that would explain the dystopian hellscape you're experiencing. Inside is about as good a 4-hour game as you can get, but I don't want to waste time waxing lyrical about what Playdead managed to put in this game, but rather try and discuss what they decided to leave out, if that's even possible. Also, just to mention, this video won't go into the ending of the game, but I will be talking about moments from pretty much the first 3/4 or so that's your cue if you don't want to be spoiled for anything, but I'll still be keeping it as spoiler-free as I can. Anyway, let's start off with the basics. What is Inside? Well, Inside is the second game from the Danish developer Playdead, whose name I mentioned a few sentences ago. Their first game was Limbo, which you've probably heard of, and if you've played it, you probably still have arachnophobia. Inside follows the same kind of basic framework as Limbo. It's dark, it's very forthright, it's creepy, and focuses on the journey of a boy far too young to be reasonably expected to be putting himself in this much danger. At this point, I'd usually try and outline the basic plot of the game, but this isn't really something I can actually do for Inside. I can try and describe elements of it, some things that happen near the start, but a lot of it doesn't really constitute a story in and of itself, and what is more blatantly narrative is quite hard to externally contextualize. We have some details that are taught almost immediately through how you play. From the outset, it seems obvious that you're being chased, or that you're on the run, and that anxiety that goes alongside constantly being on high alert is something that pervades the entire experience. But just a few minutes in, there's an instance where a car is driving down in the background, and the first time I played, I just didn't react in time, as you can see, and you get shot. It's dark, eh? Your first encounter with anyone in this game world except you, and they kill you. An adult killing a scared child without hesitation. I think this opening moment pretty much perfectly encapsulates what this video is about. Fear and ambiguity. With remarkably limited experience of the game, you're already thrust into a situation where it's hide and run away successfully, or die. So this also begs the question, why is Inside special at all in this instance? The tenet that I just mentioned is pretty ubiquitous in games. It's kind of just accepted that if you don't do things right, you'll die or suffer a setback in some way. But most games you play don't instill fear in you for not performing a task perfectly. It's nothing to do with losing progress, because the checkpoints are really generous, and it's not to do with difficulty either. It's hard to conclusively pin down exactly what Inside does to get this idea across immediately, but in my opinion, I think it comes down to what I mentioned right at the start. What's scariest here is the lack of information, and the way that our minds react to being put in that situation. You see, I think we're all guilty of overthinking. Your style of overthinking develops as you get older, new issues start to form, and your perspective on things changes. One area where Inside really shines is that it takes advantage of this aspect of human nature, people's propensity for overthinking, and capitalizes on it by managing to realize both childish and adult fears. The main way it achieves this is simply by putting you in the shoes of a child, and making you entirely responsible for him. For example, when I was younger, I didn't have a particularly overactive imagination, but I was definitely guilty of things like seeing monsters and shadows that are actually just clothes draped over a chair, or being scared that something was hiding at the foot of your bed just out of reach. I'm sure it's the same for most of you watching. In a lot of ways, Inside put me back in that mindset, and made me unexpectedly fearful of whatever was round the next corner, making my mind go places it usually wouldn't, immediately drawn to the most grisly and unfortunate possible conclusions. The best in-game example of this for me is when you start having to go underwater. So you'll get a wee submarine with a light, which is nice, and it makes you feel as if you have some kind of security. And then this vague, featureless girl starts to appear in the water, chasing you down, and she's just fucking terrifying. You can keep her away by shining your light at her, moving away, and repeating this process. But later on, you come to moments where you know she's still around, and you don't have the submarine. You have to leave it briefly to do something, or perhaps you just don't have it at all anymore. From this point on, every time you even see water in the game, your heart sinks. The design is obviously very specific, and if you do stuff right, you just manage to evade her, usually by the skin of your teeth, but the fear is so very real. There were moments playing Inside where I actually put off going in the water, because I was genuinely nervous about what was going to be in it. Was this girl alone, or one of many? What is she? Why is she underwater? Why is she out to get me? Inside makes all these questions circle around in your head, filling you with unease and anxiety, although really, all it's done is put a humanoid character in water and made it follow you. The main reason I was scared of it was because I entertained that prospect. This obviously isn't some sort of groundbreaking idea either. I mean, ambiguity causing fear is one of the most basic horror tropes there is, but whereas conventional horror media has you experiencing this as a passenger, it's different in a game. Like, my favourite horror film is The Babadook. It's one of the most unsettling and uncomfortable films I've ever seen, and uses a lot of the same techniques as Inside to create horror, despite being a different sort of horror, and you should definitely watch it if you haven't, by the way. But why this is worth talking about is predominantly because of the medium. I've said it loads before, and I'll say it loads again in the future, no doubt. Games are different in nature to other media thanks to the agency and control that they afford us. Inside is upfront a much less scary game than The Babadook is a film. The fear is much more subtle, and you'd be quite hard-pressed to label it confidently as an out-and-out horror game, yet despite this, I really did find the game to be genuinely chilling. But of course, a big part of this is atmospheric too. The most predominant aesthetic feature in Inside is essentially empty space, nothingness. The backgrounds are often repetitive, dull in colour, and very minimalistic. Plus, early on you're conditioned to avoid light because of the people with torches who are chasing you, and the sentry lights that have you killed if you're spotted. All of this comes together to provide the player with a pretty novel perspective on design, both in terms of level design and visuals, in the sense that there's a constant internal battle happening. The nothingness in the game is a source of comfort, of solace, of peace almost. You can often hide in the darkness, you're safer in abandoned areas, and generally, the quieter an area, or you, the better. However, this same source of comfort is also the source of a lot of the game's fear. What could be hiding in the darkness? Why are these areas abandoned? Why is it that the only things in this world who aren't trying to kill me are mindless and vacant husks of people? Why am I not like that? Will I be at the end? Am I heading to my own demise? You see, something really messed up has clearly happened before the events of this game, and having no real line between what's safe and what's dangerous, not clearly outlining what path you're taking, and letting the player cobble together their own version of events based off what transpires both to your character and in the background, really builds into that idea we spoke about before of ambiguity and fear combining to become one horrible amalgam. Inside puts a really interesting spin on the structure of a story, the way a player can interact with it, and displays how much can be said without the conventional linear plot that we're generally accustomed to in this genre. This game is the best example of it's not what you say, it's how you say it, and it turns out that you can create an outstanding, unsettling, and thought-provoking experience without needing to actually say much at all. Thank you very much for watching. If you like the look of Inside, give it a shot. It's really worth your time. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or even subscribing if you want to see more of my content. Cheers again, and see you next time.